There had to be a part 2. There's probably going to be a part 3 as well. So in the last stream, we more or less discussed how to fit Tony into the role of Batman. Not completely. There's probably some more that needs to be said, but when you're doing it off the cuff, you know, these things happen. Like, I don't know how, to fit Rhodes in, or if Rhodes even has a place here. I suppose he could be his Lucius Fox, but that would completely change Rhodey's character. And I don't think it would make sense for Rhodes to be a Robin. I mean, although that being said, in just one moment. To anyone here who's seen, and I want to say it came out in 2004, the animated series, simply known as The Batman, which aired and was, I believe, exclusively shown on Kids WB. Bruce has a best friend who, as far as I'm aware, does not exist in the comics, named Ethan Bennett. I think Bennett's his last name. Now, Ethan Bennett is a Gotham City PD detective. And he's a cop who believes that the police should work with Batman. Now, he doesn't find out that Bruce is Batman. That's something that Bruce wants to reveal to him. Just because he thinks it would be safer for the two of them to be in the loop. And he thinks he can trust him. Because again, Ethan is the only cop that we see who believes that the police should work with Batman. And he tells Bruce this, because Bruce is, kind of like his brother in a way, right? That close of a friendship. And then later on, and I want to say it's still in season 1, Ethan has an encounter with the Joker wherein the Joker basically kidnaps him and messes with his head. And Ethan ends up accidentally getting exposed to a chemical called Joker putty. And that's a concoction of the Jokers that he was using earlier on in the episode. This is a two-parter, by the way. I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but if anyone who's seen that show can remember it, please post in the comments. I think it's called the first one. I think is called the something of comedy, the something face of comedy, and then part two is called well, I don't want to. Part two is called the clay. Freudian slip. Part two is called the clay face of comedy. Hello, Ricardo. Welcome. So, in this version of Batman, this new character named Ethan Bennett becomes Clayface, which is a huge departure from obviously the 90s series. Well, I'm happy to hear that. That's awesome. Did you mean to say favorite superhero? Um, because I pretty much just only talk about Iron Man. Although, starting yesterday, I began this series of streams where I'm taking Tony Stark and I'm reimagining him in another role, but trying to keep the character the same. So yesterday's stream was part one of Tony Stark being put into the DC universe as Batman. And in this second stream, I kind of started off talking about how James Rhodes could potentially fit into this version of Batman. This, I think you know what I mean when I say version of Batman. But I don't really know how it would work because he wouldn't make sense as a Robin. And then I was explaining how in the 2004 The Batman series, Bruce has a friend that's a police detective who ends up becoming that series version of Clayface. So maybe this version of Batman, who is Tony Stark, ends up going up against a former friend, now turned into one of his greatest foes. But there's two things that stop me from doing that. One, Rhodes still needs to be Rhodes. And what I mean by that is he still needs to be, like, top-notch military. If he was to become a villain, he would have to still be military-based. Now, we could somehow turn James Rhodes into Deathstroke, but from what I recall, Deathstroke isn't really a Batman villain. He is, but he isn't. Like, I think he's more widely recognized as a Teen Titans foe, and I think a Justice League foe. And I couldn't tell you when he debuted, but I've never seen him in any Batman media outside of Arkham Knight. So I don't know if he's recognized as a member of his rogues gallery. And even if he is, he's not, like, a major one for Batman. So I think that's kind of out. Creating a brand new villain for this version of Batman might be fun, but that's going to take some doing. I don't think Rhodes fits the position that Lucius Fox holds, because number one, he'd have to be much older. So yeah, I really don't know how to fit Rhodes into this. If anyone has any ideas, feel free to post it in the comments here. Um, so with that out of the way for now, let's discuss villains. All of Batman's villains are going to remain, but they are going to be drastically different. Just like Tony Stark's version of Batman is drastically different from Bruce's. Let's talk about the Joker. Now, I want to keep the Batman villains uh, mostly the same. But what's going to change about them is that they will now have origins based in something science related. Like, I'm thinking they'll all either be scientists or. Yeah, they'll all basically be scientists. Now, for Joker, that is not too far out there because he concocts Joker venom, which means that he's like a genius when it comes to chemistry. And I just had an idea. So let's say that the Joker, this version, was a top notch chemist. And he created a formula by which to help people deal with um, emotional traumas or anything that would make a person feel down, which would basically activate. It'd be a chemical that would basically make you happy. But they found out that there were serious side effects that hadn't been tested enough, and he really wanted it out there because he was committed to it. Maybe something traumatic happened in his past. Um, and so what ends up happening is tests it on himself. And I don't know, maybe he thinks that an extra dose is needed. That, the reason why it's not effective is because people aren't being given enough. And so this causes him to, um, you know, get a little too happy. Basically, it makes it so that his psyche can't really process. I don't want to say right from wrong, but whatever part of the brain's chemistry that allows you to be happy. Let's just say that it pretty much constantly releases endorphins throughout endorphins, and it turns the happiness activator, if you will, on full stop without ever turning it off. But unfortunately, it also kind of messes with his perception of reality and also his understanding of right and wrong. That's where the psychosis comes from. That's where the psychopathy comes from. I don't know how we would make this version of the Joker, who basically injected himself with a happiness chemical. I don't know how we would go about giving him the ghost white skin with the green hair, like the bleached skin and whatnot. Um, That'll have to be sorted out somehow because that's an iconic look and that needs to stay the same. Now, one potential problem could be, alright, if this Joker was formerly a chemist, his original name and identity would be known, right? Let's say something really twisted happens. He silences everyone who could possibly know him. In a weird way, he's kind of like the Hulk. And what do I mean by that? He's got a completely new personality now. The old Joker is gone. The original person that Joker was is gone. If anyone's seen the movie The Secret Window, this chemist has basically gone through what Johnny Depp's character does in that, where the original Mort Rainey is gone and replaced with a guy named John Shooter. So he's more or less got DID, but I don't know if that's a good way to take Joker because he's never had DID. Maybe it works for this new version because we are doing things at least somewhat differently, but I don't know. Like DID as well as being a psychopath? Not sure. Although I do think it's been hinted at that he may have like he has joked about having like more than one persona, so maybe that could work. Um Now another issue would be okay, this version of Joker created himself. And he's a genius chemist. Like that's gonna be so in a way he kind of becomes like Scarecrow as well. Which I don't think means that Scarecrow is irrelevant because again, Joker and chemistry has kind of always been a thing. Um and Scarecrow's desire to strike fear into people and do it through various means is much different from a person who just wants to keep creating the same formula but maybe making it better and better and then ultimately deciding everybody would be better off if they were insane and laughed at everything. Now, Tony Stark's Batman, ironically enough, might be too much for this Joker to handle. Because he's got a technologically advanced Batman suit that's more like a souped up version of the Batman Beyond suit. And this is before uh the time period in which Batman Beyond would take place. So, how does this Joker threaten this Batman? This is what I think. will basically reinvent the story from Return of the Joker to suit this version of the Joker. The only difference being that the Joker doesn't come up with the process. He forces somebody else to do it for him. Let's say he finds a scientist who's working on some kind of physical enhancement. And this, I'm thinking this would have maybe been like after a run in with Batman, and Joker's like, okay, I can't do a thing to you. You have a technologically advanced suit. You're flying around. You know, you've got all these gadgets, and you can also wallop me in hand to hand. And I'm not going to be able to make all of Gotham permanently happy if I can't even challenge you. So, this is where Tony Stark's version of the Joker, in a weird way, kind of also becomes Green Goblin, but not literally. As I said, he finds a scientist who is working on an enhancement formula to basically think Captain America, but I'm actually thinking like maybe even a little bit more than that. And so he forces this scientist through this laughing formula, this insanity formula, to basically become his number two. I don't know if this is too controversial, but I'm thinking this scientist turns out to be Harley Quinn. Now I know that's a huge departure from her character, having been a psychiatrist who treated Joker and fell for him, but her being like a scientist who was working on a superhuman or enhancement formula, I think it kind of works better for this version of the Joker because there needs to be some kind of tech involved for every member of Batman's rogues gallery to be able to handle the Tony Stark version of Batman in any capacity. So, Harley Quinn here is basically in a weird way, she's basically this version of the Joker, Tony Stark. She builds tech for this Joker to use because she's become insane as a result of his formula. So, and I'm thinking that this version of the Joker I can't remember what the I'm gonna say that he more or less gets a suit that's inspired by the Joker card, which kind of makes him seem like a weird amalgamation of a member of the Royal Flush Gang, the Joker, and Green Goblin all in one. But at least in one instance, and this was during the Justice League animated series, the Royal Flush Gang actually worked for Joker. So maybe he could also sort of double as the Royal Flush Gang's leader. And I think that's going to be it for the Joker. Just going to talk like, just going to be talking about like an origin for these heroes. Villains, sorry, not heroes. Who should we do next? How about Mr. Freeze? Now, Mr. Freeze already had like a mechanical suit that enhanced his strength. But a slight upgrade, I think, is still um, in the cards. I've talked with friends before about how I would include Mr. Freeze in a new Batman movie. Because you know how in the movies they tend to change them in some way to make more sense in those movies. At least that's what I'm sure the directors and writers would say. And my idea was that this version of Victor Freeze is a NASA scientist who specializes in he basically is the one who had this idea to create what is known as cryosleep, which I know pretty much anyone who's seen a sci-fi movie has at least seen once. It's where you go basically into stasis and you wake up like a long time in the future. Like months, maybe weeks. And it preserves your body. It basically stops your biological clock. And it does it through like I don't know if it's a freezing chamber, but again, that was more or less what Mr. Freeze's whole deal was initially anyway, was that if I freeze my wife in a cryo tank, it'll keep her preserved until a cure can be discovered. This is a stream. It's actually a part two stream of basically reimagining Tony Stark in the DC universe as Batman. And in this part two, I'm talking about how to reinvent Batman's rogues gallery to suit the purposes of to be different but also better threaten uh, this Batman who is Tony Stark. I already talked about the Joker, where in this version, the Joker was a genius chemist who concocted a formula by which to make people essentially permanently happy. That wasn't like necessarily his initial plan, but you know, he figured if he could find a way to manipulate um, the chemistry in a person's body, he could basically eliminate depression and help people deal with trauma. But what it ended up doing was it messed with those who it was tested on. It messed with their psyches and basically drove them insane to where they found everything funny. And so this scientist tested it on himself, thinking that there was something wrong with the formula. He just needed to recreate it, or maybe another dose was needed. That's right. He thought another dose was needed because it wasn't effective enough. Um, and it drove him insane. It made him find everything funny. Literally. Like a person getting hit by a car is something that he would just laugh at and not see any problems with, finding amusing. Um, and then I went into how his version of Harley Quinn is not going to be a psychiatrist, but a scientist who was working on an enhancement formula as well as like military technology for the government. Because again, Tony Stark's Batman is more of a technologically advanced Batman, and even his Joker needs to have some way of fighting him. Um, and then I basically said that he'll have some kind of a suit that makes him look like the image on the Joker's card. Essentially making him the leader of the Royal Flush, like as his story would probably progress. Now I've moved on to Mr. Freeze, who is reimagined as a NASA scientist, theorizing that you can send people farther into space, like even like 20 years away from the planet, theoretically speaking, by essentially freezing them. Now, I'm thinking that Nora will still have an illness, and he just tests it on his wife. But in this scenario, things get a little bit more complicated. It's not just some greedy rich guy who owns a company that forces him to shut it off, or tries to force him to shut it off, and then he ends up getting hit with chemicals and, his skin turns icy cold. No. In this version, it's basically the government that comes in and says, you don't have authorization to test this on your wife. You need to bring her out of it right away. I don't think that takes away from Mr. Freeze being a sympathetic villain. Um, but again, it changes the origin enough to make it somewhat fresh. And so what happens is, he, um, I don't know how he gets his icy disposition, but I'm sure it has something to do with these stasis chambers that he's been working on. And as is the case with the original Mr. Freeze, this one also wants revenge on those who wronged him. But his suit is a bit different. He essentially takes an astronaut suit and repurposes as well as upgrades it. If I'm not mistaken, I think Victor Freeze built his suit originally anyway. And if he's a NASA scientist who's, worked on a cryogenic chamber, as well as, and that involves, building like a piece of tech. I don't think it would be too big of a stretch to say that he has um, a background in robotics as well. And so he repurposes an astronaut suit to contain him, like the original Mr. Freeze does. But his suit, number one, has basically a jetpack. And I mean, it's gonna have to have some kind of freezing gun, but maybe um it's free. This suit's freezing gun is more in the form of like cannons that are kind of attached to the arms. To give you a to give you an example of what I mean, if you know Pyro from the X-Men, he has like arm mounted cannons that shoot fire. Basically that, but ice. Um, and I'm thinking we even change it from just like blasts of ice to like liquid nitrogen, maybe. So that's Mr. Freeze. Who else? I think the rest of them are gonna be pretty hard to reimagine. I mean, because how do you take Clayface and make him into a former scientist? Like, what kind of science even remotely relates to turning yourself into some kind of a clay monster? I mean, the only thing I could think of is that he was some kind of scientist who was trying to find a way to increase a human's ability to survive in harsh environments, but for that to evolve into shapeshifting, I, I honestly don't know, and that also would kind technically mean that he'd have to have been a former NASA scientist that was trying to figure out a way to make it so that if and when they explore other planets, the astronauts' bodies are able to adapt to those environments. But again, how do you go from that to a body that can shapeshift? And not just shapeshift, but be clay. Um, the Riddler is going to be difficult also because, okay, this whole thing is riddles. Yes, the Joker was reimagined to have some capability of being able to challenge this Batman physically, but the Riddler, I don't know, like, well, I mean, he has shown um a knowledge, what appears to be a knowledge of experience in robotics himself, uh, as well as basically being a master hacker. Um, so unfortunately, he may have to basically have like his own roboticized suit or mechanical suit. Um, but I don't know if that makes sense for the Riddler. It might be better if he had like robot goons, if you will, that take care of the physical part of it. Um, Bane, well, he would probably be a pretty easy one to reimagine. You could say that he basically functions as like a brand new version of Red Hulk, although not necessarily literally. It's ironic that I say that because in that one Batman series I mentioned, when he buffs up, his skin turns red and he becomes giant sized. So, um, and I mean, he's already enhanced by something, but maybe Venom in this universe is a bit different. Like he doesn't have some kind of a wire stuck, attached to his head that's pumping it into him. No. Venom basically gives him like a transformation that he can enter into at will, and it buffs him up. So he'd basically turn into like in a weird way, like a obviously much weaker version of the Hulk, but without the skin color change and without like the personality change. Rachel Ghoul, would basically become the new Mandarin, which is a bit odd since, you know, I mean, he's not actually the Mandarin, but you'd think that a Mandarin-like character going up against another would end up being the main adversary of another version of Tony Stark. But the Joker has to be Batman's main foe. Poison Ivy, you'd basically just have to give plant powers to her, which only one version really has, and that's from the 2004 the Batman series. I unfortunately don't know how that works. Well, here's an idea. And this is a pretty big departure from Poison Ivy, how she's usually presented, but here she's both a botanist and a geneticist. And she's working on a project um which is intended to basically grant human beings the ability to use photosynthesis. But it goes awry and it mutates her. But I also realize that doesn't necessarily translate into like plant powers, but it could because it basically should be changing her DNA to be at least somewhat part plant. I know she's usually like an eco terrorist, where, she wants to punish people who harm plants in any way or destroy forests, but I mean, she could still do that, right? Like, that could come later. Maybe in this instance, it's because she's part plant now and her psyche has changed. Like, she's always, loved plants, found them fascinating, and she would get upset about forests being destroyed, but she wouldn't, try to harm people for it. And now she does. Not, I'm kind of having a hard time figuring out like how she would fight. But I mean, photosynthesis, enhanced healing, enhanced strength, uh, as well as maybe like plant mutagenic abilities. Sorry for yawning just now. Um, okay, so we've done the Joker, we've done Mr. Freeze. Clayface, I have no idea how to make him work. Uh, we've done Bane. We've basically done Riddler. Uh, I mean, he already works for not a tech company, but a games company, and he builds a very popular computer game. I don't think much needs to be changed for him to be. Well, I mean, We could change the Riddler's origin to being like part of the CIA. Or just a government agent of some sort. Who just somehow happens to have a background in robotics, which I know makes literally no sense, but um I mean, he could be um what's the word I'm searching for? Not computer analyst. He could be wait a minute, that's what he could be. He could be a scientist who is trying to develop a way to jam communications for like potential adversaries for the military's use. Basically, a way to shut off radar and to um, like destroy their systems without like causing physical damage. As well as a way to like acquire the information that they have. Which I think that would work. So he'd basically have the ability to like shut down technology. And I don't know, maybe he takes it a bit too far, and or maybe another person takes the idea as their own, and that leads to Edward Nygma losing the credibility he should have gotten as, you know, the man who came up with this. Um, and he basically vows revenge because, you know, they decide, okay, you haven't come up with any good ideas in a long time. We don't have any use for you. Like, we need to have um people that are constantly able to come up with new ideas, new ways to do things, and this time you didn't manage to do that, so you're out. So he loses his job and vows revenge against the government, basically. Who else is there? Scarface, I think, is pretty much impossible. Catwoman, I don't know. Plus, I also don't really consider her to be a villain of Batman's. She's an adversary at times, but she's more like a combination between an antagonist and an ally. I've never really seen her as a villain, and I don't think that makes sense for her to be a villain of Batman's. Um, she's more like a thorn in his side. Um, unless we were to make this version of Catwoman, basically Pepper Potts, but I don't know if that works. Um, I don't know what to do with Scarecrow. I mean, well, I kind of do, but that would more or less make him like a new version of Mysterio slash Spellbinder. Killer Croc could honestly just quite literally be a mutated human. He would be another geneticist like Poison Ivy, but dealing with like I guess animal DNA, which ironically makes him into into this Batman's like Doc Connors. Uh who else is there that we can do? You know what? This is gonna sound crazy, but I just had an idea. What if James Rhodes, for this version of Tony Stark, goes on to become his Hush? It, it sounds ridiculous, but I mean, I don't even know how you would go about it because uh, Hush was pretty much always messed up in the head. And you'd have to like fundamentally change James Rhodes' character to make that transformation occur. Um, and again, there's nothing about Hush that is militaristic. Like, yeah, he uses guns, but he's not. I believe he's a surgeon like his father. Like, that's his expertise. Is surgery. He basically becomes a serial. Uh, at least he does in Arkham City. Um, Speaking of, Victor Zaz pretty much has no place here. um, I feel like we got every one of Batman's major rogues. I realize most of them weren't explained in detail. Um, but I don't know, for some reason can't think of. I was more focused on some than others. And once again, I still have literally no idea how you make Clayface work. Um, like if we were, this is a weird thing to say. If we were to say something like, okay, If we were doing a video where we're reimagining Doctor Strange, obviously not Hugo Strange. I mean Stephen Strange. If we were to say, oh, okay, we're going to take him and reimagine him as Batman, then you could just say, okay, well, Clayface it becomes Clayface through magic. Easy. Either that or you basically turn him into like a villainous version of the Thing. Um, Possibly mixed with Sandman, where and actually, now that I think about it, in a weird way, he would also kind of be like have an origin similar to Doctor Manhattan. The thought I had was that he's trying to find a way, working on a way to increase human survivability, and he takes it too far and he tries to do something with like intense radiation, and that basically turns him into Clayface. But I couldn't figure out. I don't know how the specifics would work. What the specifics would be. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. In future streams, if people are really liking this, I can try to go more in depth. Um, I think part 3 will be I don't know. Talking about the other characters that are in Batman's comics, like Jim Gordon, for example. Oh my God, right. I forgot about Two-Face. He's another one I literally have no idea how to reinvent. Um, for the purposes of these discussions. I mean, well, this would be a pretty drastic change, but maybe Rhodes becomes this Batman's version of Two-Face. But instead of being like, he could still be district attorney, but he, started off in the military and he became like a JAG, and then eventually, after no longer being in a JAG officer, he then decided to campaign and run for district attorney. But I don't know what the heck you do with him threatening Batman. Like, it's not like this version of Rhodes is going to be like a villain version of War Machine, who is also Two-Face. So I don't know. So, but yeah, I guess in the next one we'll talk about like Bruce's allies. Um, like talk more about Alfred. Talk about what uh may need to be changed about Jim Gordon. Um, discuss whether or not the Robins even make sense anymore. I mean, I say this mostly due to bias, but for me, there's only really ever been one character worthy of being Robin, and that's Dick Grayson. I'm probably the only person on the planet that feels that way, but yeah. And then he obviously goes on to become Nightwing, so I don't know, maybe he uh gets some kind of suit too. But the thought of Robin getting like a Robin, as in bird themed suit, that's like a Batman Beyond suit is just way too silly. I don't even know how you could make that cool. I mean, maybe you could give it like a bird like helmet that's kind of similar to not Hawkman. I thought I had an idea, but I don't, and I lost the thought. Well, maybe Dick Grayson in this universe basically has a suit like Falcon from the Avengers. Sam, is it Sam Wilson? Yeah. So I think that's gonna do it for now. Um, Thank you once again for joining me for this stream. I hope you found this conversation intriguing or at least somewhat entertaining. Um, if you haven't already and would like to, please leave a like and subscribe, or feel free to do so after the fact. And that, of course, goes for anyone who sees this once it is public at 5 p.m. My time. You can feel free to leave a like. Please comment if you have any ideas, things that you'd like to see me talk about. Please post them. Any criticisms, and also consider subscribing. Hoping to make it to 300 subs before the month is over. So let's see if we can't make that happen. And with all that being said, as always, the truth is, I am Iron Man.